Welcome to this edition of the Vermont Report on Palestine, Israel. I'm Mark Hage. This episode of our program begins with a documentary produced by the news portal Mondoweiss. It explains why the crime of apartheid, as defined under international law, applies to the State of Israel. Why have Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, Israel's most distinguished human rights organization, B'Tselem, concluded that Israel is an apartheid state? This documentary will explain. Our second and third reports examines the growing use of artificial intelligence and surveillance systems by Israeli occupation forces to infiltrate, record, and intervene in Palestinian life in the occupied West Bank, including East Jerusalem. We'll begin, though, with the Mondoweiss documentary on apartheid.
Military checkpoints, Jewish-only roads and towns, color-coded ID cards, and a separate set of laws for Palestinians and Israelis. This is the reality of life for millions of Palestinians living under Israeli control. From the occupied West Bank and East Jerusalem to Israel and the Gaza Strip, Palestinians are living under a system of laws and rules that discriminate against them based on one principal factor: the fact that they are Palestinian. It's a reality that many have likened to apartheid South Africa, where the colonial white minority ruled over the indigenous black population through institutionalized racial segregation. During apartheid-era South Africa, black South Africans were forced to carry ID cards wherever they went, their movement was severely restricted, and they were relegated to living in impoverished Bantustans. When they tried to rise up against these racist policies, they were violently suppressed and imprisoned en masse. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? So what is apartheid? Under international law, it's a crime against humanity that isn't actually unique to South Africa. It's defined as the inhumane acts committed in the context of an institutionalized regime of systematic oppression and domination by one racial group over another, committed with the intention of maintaining that regime. So if apartheid isn't unique to South Africa, does it apply to Israel and Palestine? Well, rights groups say that it does. For decades, Palestinians have called out explicit practices of Israeli apartheid against them in the occupied territory and within Israel itself. Over the past year, more rights groups have joined the calls to end Israeli apartheid, including leading Israeli human rights group B'Tselem, Human Rights Watch, and most recently, Amnesty International. So let's take a look at Israeli apartheid. While Israeli apartheid manifests itself in many different ways, it can be easily understood through geographic location. Since 1948, Israel has divided and carved up historic Palestine into different units, all under a certain degree of control by the Israeli state. Even in places like the West Bank and Gaza, where the Palestinian Authority and Hamas maintain certain levels of bureaucratic control, everything else is controlled by Israel. From the borders and population registry to essential resources like water and electricity. There are an estimated 7 million Palestinians and 7 million Jews living in the area between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean Sea. Jewish persons can largely treat the entire territory as one and are free to move between its borders and live with full rights wherever they choose. Palestinians, however, face a very different reality. Palestinians have largely been split up into 5 major geographic locations: Israel, the occupied Palestinian territory, which includes East Jerusalem, the West Bank, and Gaza, and the diaspora, where millions of Palestinian refugees live in exile, banned from returning to their homes. In each of these places, Israel maintains a set of laws that favor the rights of one set of people, Jews, over another, Palestinians. One of the primary ways that Israel separates Palestinians and maintains domination over them is through its control of the population registry and ID system. By controlling the registry, Israeli authorities have the power to restrict every aspect of Palestinian life, from determining where Palestinians are allowed to live, who they're able to marry, and what services they do and do not have access to. For Palestinians, the type of ID you carry dictates the level of rights that you have, and to which degree your life is controlled by the Israeli state and security apparatus. For example, Palestinians living in the West Bank have a different ID than Palestinians living in Israel, and are thus subject to a different set of laws. But in both cases, the rights of the Palestinians in these areas are inferior to those of Jewish persons living in those same places. This is Palestinian human rights expert Rania Muhareb.
Through this ID system, Palestinians have been systematically fragmented, and fragmentation plays an essential role in the establishment of apartheid. Palestinians are deprived of the right to meet, to live together, to group, or to exercise any collective rights. And their rights essentially depend on the status imposed on them by Israel.
You can think about it like a tiered system, where the lower you go, the less rights you have. On the top tier, you have Jewish Israelis, who have full rights under the law and are free to live throughout Israel and the occupied Palestinian territory, with the exception of Gaza. Next, you have Palestinian citizens of Israel who carry Israeli passports and have the right to vote in Israeli elections. While they enjoy more freedoms than Palestinians in the occupied territory, Palestinian citizens of Israel are treated as second-class citizens compared to Israeli Jews.
They face institutionalized discrimination in accessing professions. They receive inferior services, receive less public allocations, budget allocations, and they face discriminatory planning and zoning, which essentially applies on both sides of the Green Line.
Next up, you have Palestinians living in occupied East Jerusalem, who carry blue ID cards and are given permanent residency status, which can be revoked by the state at any time. Further down the line are Palestinians in the West Bank who carry green ID cards. They live under Israeli military rule and have no rights under the law. Palestinians here live in a series of non-contiguous enclaves separated by Israeli checkpoints, walls, and settlements that restrict their every move. In Gaza, Palestinians also carry green ID cards but face even further restrictions on their movement. Since 2007, Israel has upheld a land, air, and sea blockade that has crippled Gaza, making it uninhabitable as of 2020, according to the UN. Lastly, come Palestinian refugees living in exile, who have no form of ID and are barred by Israel from returning to their historic homelands.
By looking at the situation in such a fragmented manner, this also serves Israel's apartheid regime of dividing Palestinians and preventing them from exercising collective rights.
Now that we've broken down how Israel divides Palestinians both geographically and through its ID system, we can take a look at the different ways that Israel applies its apartheid system to the Palestinians in those areas. As B'Tselem pointed out in its report on Israeli apartheid, one of the primary ways Israel maintains its regime is through its land policies. Israel largely treats land as a resource that serves to benefit the Jewish people. At the same time, the state uses restrictive policies to corral Palestinians into small enclaves through the expropriation and confiscation of their land. Even when you look at who has the right to build on the land, that right is almost always reserved for Jews, not Palestinians. But these racist land policies are not relegated to the occupied Palestinian territory. In fact, they're widely practiced inside Israel as well. In the decades since 1948, Israel has approved the construction of hundreds of new towns for its Jewish communities, yet not a single new community has been approved for its Palestinian citizens, who make up 20% of the population. Palestinian citizens of Israel have only been given access to less than 3% of the country's total area for their communities and local councils. Experts say these discriminatory land policies that favor Jews over Palestinians are essential to understanding Israeli apartheid.
The effort to uproot Palestinians forms part of a broader settler colonial logic of replacing indigenous Palestinians with Jewish settlers. So the transfer of Palestinians from their lands and properties, which is a process that, as we know, is ongoing, has served both to establish apartheid and to continuously maintain it over Palestinians.
To see these harmful policies in action, one has to look no further than the town of Jisr al-Zarqa, a small fishing village in northern Israel and the last remaining Palestinian village on the Mediterranean coast outside of Gaza. Surrounded by wealthy Israeli towns, the impoverished Jisr al-Zarqa is a stark example of Israeli apartheid. It's home to an estimated 15,000 Palestinians and is one of the poorest towns in Israel, with about 80% of residents living below the poverty line. Jisr al-Zarqa is surrounded on all four sides, which prevent the village from expanding. To the north is a Jewish kibbutz and an Israeli nature reserve. To the south is the upscale Israeli town of Caesarea, which was built on the rubble of a Palestinian village in 1952. It's home to former Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and boasts upscale amenities like a golf course, harbor, archaeological site, and an industrial business park. To the east of Jisr al-Zarqa is Highway 2, which was constructed by Israel in the 1960s and cut the residents of the town off from hundreds of acres of their historical farmlands. And to the west is the Mediterranean Sea.
نحن نشعر بأننا موجودين في سجن ونعيش في سجن، وهذا يعني ينعكس وينسحب على كافة المستويات. يعني نرى هذا ونشعر هذا السجن ليس فقط من ناحية جغرافية، كذلك في المستوى التربوي وعلى الصعيد الاقتصادي الاجتماعي وعلى الصعيد الحياة اليومية، ونرى ذلك في المخططات حتى. قرب الحدود مع البلدات اليهودية ممنوعين من البناء، يعني على بعد 100 أو 200 متر. كذلك بالقرب مثلا من شاطئ البحر على بعد 100 متر من خط المياه ممنوع البناء. بالمناطق التي يتواجد فيها البقايا آثار ومعالم أثرية ممنوع البناء.
Just like in the occupied territory, Palestinian citizens of Israel, like those living in Jisr al-Zarqa, are subject to detrimental zoning policies that force many people to build without permits and thus subjecting them to home demolitions.
هنالك تقريبا أكثر من 400 بيت أو أكثر غير مرخصة وتنتظر ترخيص من لجان التخطيط والبناء. يعني قرية الصيادين كلها، يعني كل الأكواخ هنا والمخازن بحسب القانون الإسرائيلي هي غير مرخصة كذلك، ونحن تحت طائلة وخطر الهدم، وهذا ما حدث لي. العقاب الأكبر الذي يفرض على الناس في قرية جسر الزرقاء وفي البلدات العربية إضافة إلى هدم البيوت هي المحاكمات والغرامات. يعني حوالي 80% وأكثر من السكان والمواطنين في جسر الزرقاء يعني لديهم إما غرامات مالية كبيرة من قبل سلطات التنظيم والبناء التخطيط والبناء، وكذلك من قبل المحاكم الإسرائيلية. الكل لديه غرامات وتم محاكمتها أكثر من مرة.
While the government refuses to approve new construction in Jisr al-Zarqa, Israeli planning authorities have provided sufficient land and zoning permissions to the neighboring Jewish towns in order to facilitate their growth.
حقيقة لا مقارنة ما بين الحياة ومعيشة أهالي جسر الزرقاء وبين جيراننا اليهود، خاصة مدينة الأثرياء. لا يوجد مقارنة، لا على المستوى المعيشي ولا الاقتصادي ولا الاجتماعي ولا السكني ولا الحيز ولا أي شيء، وحتى السياسي والحقوقي فيش مقارنة. صعب جدا نقارن، هناك فجوات كبيرة جدا. يعني الامتيازات والأفضلية والحقوق لليهودي بطبيعة الحال يعني يحصل على كل شيء في حياته وفي مسيرة حياته ولتحسين معيشته، ولكن ابن جسر الزرقاء هو في الهاوية، يعني تحيط به الأزمات ويلفه الحصار من كل جانب وعلى كل مستوى، وبالتالي لا يوجد أي مقارنة.
So far, we've looked at how Israel divides and fragments Palestinians geographically through color-coded ID systems and harmful land and zoning policies. But Israel's apartheid policies don't stop there. Another way that Israel separates Palestinians and maintains its domination is through citizenship and immigration laws, which, once again, favor Jews and discriminate against Palestinians. After the Nakba in 1948, Israel expropriated hundreds of thousands of acres of Palestinian land and gave it to its new Jewish citizens who came from around the world. At the same time, it instituted a number of laws that prevented the Palestinians who it had made refugees and their descendants, who now number over 5 million, from ever returning to their homelands. While international law requires the right of return for Palestinian refugees, the state has continued to deny that right until today, and largely bans Palestinians from visiting the country, even as tourists. This is Amina al-Ashkar, a Palestinian refugee living in Lebanon.
We're being denied to go into this land because of who we are. And that's the whole thing around apartheid, right? Being denied something that it is a right for you based on who you are, or your ethnicity, or your religion, or whatever. We're denied to go into Palestine just because we are Palestinians. And I don't know if that's not apartheid. What is apartheid?
While Palestinian refugees are unable to return to their homes, Jewish persons from around the world can actually immigrate freely to Israel and even become citizens, even if they've never stepped foot in the country before.
Israeli legislation allows settlers, Jewish settlers, whether they hold Israeli citizenship or not, to live throughout the territory, and this obviously contributes to the further displacement and dispossession of Palestinians. So you can see how the law systematically favors Jewish Israelis over Palestinians wherever they reside.
Israel's control of Palestinian lives extends far beyond borders, checkpoints, and documents. For tens of thousands of Palestinian families, the state controls intimate parts of their family lives: who they can marry, what kind of rights their children will have, and if they can even live together as a family. For decades, Israel upheld a ban on family unification, and in 2022, they passed it into law. The law denies naturalization to Palestinians from the occupied West Bank or Gaza who are married to Israeli citizens, forcing thousands of Palestinian families to either emigrate or live apart. Essentially, it means that if a Palestinian citizen of Israel married someone from the West Bank or Gaza, their spouse will not have the right to live with them in Israel and become a citizen.
Through this process, Palestinians are deprived of the right to live together, and they're deprived of the right to family life, choice of spouse, and equality in marriage. And these policies are, of course, consistent with some of the inhuman acts that are listed under the Apartheid Convention.
Such laws also present barriers to Palestinians from different units within the occupied Palestinian territory from falling in love, getting married, and starting a family. For example, if a Palestinian from East Jerusalem fell in love with a Palestinian from the West Bank, the West Bank resident cannot legally go to live in East Jerusalem with their spouse because Israeli law prevents it. And if the spouse from East Jerusalem were to move to the West Bank, Israel would revoke their permanent residency in the city, making them stateless. Even their future children would face legal obstacles when it comes to getting residency status. Such is the case for 25-year-old Yasmin. Her father is from Jerusalem and her mother is from the West Bank. She's one of tens of thousands of Palestinians who are stateless and have no legal residency anywhere in the country, all because Israel denies her family's right to be together.
انولدت لأم بتحمل هوية الضفة ولأب بيحمل هوية القدس، وتسجلت في الداخلية الإسرائيلية على حسب هوية أبوي، وبعدها اكتشفنا إنه اسمي انسحب من السيستم، وإحنا لهلا بنحاول إنه أرجع اسمي، وحاطين محاكم وفي محاميين وبطالب إني أخذ هويتي.
يعني موضوع الهويات هي المشكلة الأساسية، إنه يوم ما واحد من القدس يتجوز حدا من خارج القدس بتصير هناك في مشاكل كثير للعائلة، لأنه لم الشمل مش عملية سهلة. والمشكلة الأهم إنه الواحد يوم ما يتجوز لازم يعني يسأل، يعني أي واحد بشوف وحدة أو وحدة بتشوف واحد قبل ما يحبها ولا تحبه يسأله شو هويته، يعني لأنه غير هذا الحكي، لأنه ممنوع الحب وممنوع التواصل وممنوع الزواج غير الواحد يعرف شو التصنيف.
نقص الهوية مأثر على حياتي. أولاً في التعليم دايماً كنت بواجه صعوبات، سواء في المدرسة أو في الجامعة. كيف كنت أسجل؟ كانوا دايماً يغلبوني لأنه ما عندي وراق رسمية تثبت مين أنا، كيف أسجل. وحتى مثلاً في موضوع التأمين الصحي بقدرش يكون عندي رخصة سواقة، بقدرش أسافر. حتى يعني أبسط الحقوق إنه يكون عندي حساب بنك ما عندي. يعني أنا كإنسانة موجودة ما عنديش ولا أي حق، بس لأني انولدت في فلسطين بتصير هاي الحالة. بس ولا في أي دولة في العالم أي واحد في العالم بولد ما بيكون عنده أي ورقة بتثبت وجوده.
In this video, we've taken a look at how Israel imposes apartheid on Palestinians in every aspect of their lives and wherever they live. Whether you're a citizen of Israel or a resident of Gaza, so long as you are Palestinian, your rights are inferior to the rights of Jews. Beyond its ID system, land, citizenship, and immigration policies, Israel continues to oppress Palestinians every day in the form of home demolitions, arrests, imprisonment, and extrajudicial killings. Even when Palestinians try to challenge Israel's apartheid policies, they are criminalized and attacked by the Israeli government.
When we talk about a system of apartheid under international law, we're talking about a series of human rights violations that are committed with a specific intention. And that intention is to maintain racial domination over a group. In this case, Palestinians are systematically deprived of their rights, both collective and, in many cases, individual rights.
So now that more human rights groups are joining the call to end Israeli apartheid, what comes next?
At the end of the day, apartheid allows Palestinians to better articulate the nature of the oppression that is imposed on them as a people. And through that, collective action can be taken to counter this institutionalized oppression.
Occupied East Jerusalem. It's Ramadan, when the old city is at its most dazzling and most surveilled. Across East Jerusalem, Palestinian presence is under assault. This year, as Ramadan coincided with both Easter and Passover, Israeli forces unleashed horror in the holiest of spaces.
Video from inside Al-Aqsa Mosque shows police officers beating people with batons.
Violent incidents against Christian communities in Jerusalem increased this year.
The excessive use of violence, the surveillance, are a display of Israeli dominance, a reminder that in Jerusalem, there is no safe space for Palestinians. Israel claims Jerusalem as its eternal and united capital. Yet in the old city, life remains distinctly Palestinian. Around 35,000 people live inside the city walls. 90% of them are Palestinian. This is where Palestinians come to pray, where they celebrate, socialize, and shop. and in moments of unity, shared anger or grief, it's where Palestinians rebel. But Palestinian existence in East Jerusalem is under threat, carefully watched, recorded, and restricted. In the old city's narrow streets and alleyways, cameras are inescapable. There are, on average, 1 to 2 of them every 5 meters.
As soon as you walk towards the old city, you already see police and military presence. You see cameras. You see these relatively new surveillance towers that are equipped with audio sensors, with microphones, with video cameras, with all kinds of different sorts of technologies. And those surround the old city, and those are also found in Sheikh Jarrah and Silwan and other kinds of Palestinian areas.
Of course, you don't see the same system of surveillance in the western part of Jerusalem, where Jewish Israelis mostly live. You only see this kind of intrusive surveillance on the streets where Palestinians live, in our communities, in our neighborhoods, in our public spaces. The steps of Damascus Gate, for example. It's a place where people gather, where people celebrate religious holidays. If you just stand on the steps of Damascus Gate, you'll see several of the police watchtowers. People are familiar with the fact that those towers are used for beating and interrogating Palestinians on the spot.
The old city is a focal point of protest and resistance, which explains why it's become such a militarized space. Palestinians say they are often intercepted here by Israeli security forces, who seem to know everything about them. It's an unsettling feeling that creates a chilling effect, the sense that you're being constantly watched, even when you've done nothing wrong.
The cameras in the city are the tool that they use to track Palestinians and intimidate them. I remember one time I was at Damascus Gate to cover a protest. And maybe half an hour after that protest ended, a squad of the border police asked for my ID and just told me to stop. The leading commander kept saying, "We just received a note that you are suspicious and we have to check you." They just got told this guy is passing through their area, and they just approached me and interrogated me and put me up on the wall, just like this, and searched me in front of people because they targeted me from the cameras.
This is how these techniques play out. Security forces snatch Palestinians after tracking them with facial recognition cameras. Surveillance in Jerusalem is frequently used to identify and incriminate Palestinians, but mysteriously, it is almost never available to absolve them. In April, Israeli police shot and killed 26-year-old Mohammed al-Usaybi here at the Chain Gate, after police say he tried to reach for an officer's weapon. There are a lot of cameras around the Chain Gate, but police say there was no CCTV coverage of the incident. No body camera footage either. It's a narrative even former Israeli police commanders have told reporters they find hard to believe. Palestinians say it follows a pattern. In 2020, Israeli police released this edited clip of Maher Za'atara, who suffered from paranoid schizophrenia. Za'atara had just tried to stab someone when police, quote, neutralized him to stop him posing a threat to others. But new CCTV footage obtained by Israeli newspaper Haaretz shows Za'atara close to 10 meters away from police, moving backwards when he was shot more than a dozen times. This unedited video debunks the argument that Za'atara posed an immediate threat that justified his execution.
When there are moments that might expose Israeli violence, particularly when there is injury or death or killing of Palestinians, there's often this claim of, oh, the camera wasn't working, or there was some sort of glitch in the system. The surprise element is part of a way to make sure that everyone's always on their best behavior, that everyone's always being policed, everyone's always being surveyed. The very kind of haphazardness or the ad hocness, I think, is itself part of the regime of surveillance.
Israeli surveillance in Jerusalem props up a policy of what is called Judaization, an effort to cement Jewish control over the whole city. Israel occupied and illegally annexed East Jerusalem in 1967. Ever since, the state has suppressed Palestinian sovereignty in the city, while increasing the Jewish-Israeli presence. The boundaries of Jerusalem have kept expanding, as Israel has built dozens of settlements inside and around Palestinian neighborhoods. It's all part of an explicit effort by the government to maintain a solid Jewish majority. One of the areas under threat is Silwan, just south of the old city, a target of the right-wing settler organization Elad. Groups like Elad use coercion, manipulation, the law, and a lot of money to try and force Palestinians from their homes.
إلي محاكم حوالي 32 عام ولا من محكمة لمحكمة ومن إخلاء لإخلاء.
Amal Sumerin and her family have been fighting to keep their home for more than 30 years, a battle they recently won. The creeping dispossession of families like hers would be impossible without surveillance. One reinforces the other. The more settlers that arrive, the more cameras that appear.
عندي كاميرا من هون وكاميرا من هون بيسلطوهن على بيتنا يعني دغري. فإحنا هنا يعني مكشوفين كتير، هم بيراقبونا، بيراقبوا شو بنعمل، شو بناكل، شو بنشرب، شو بنساوي، شو يعني أي حدا بدخل علينا، مراقبين إحنا 24 ساعة منهم.
Silwan is located above Elad's flagship settlement project, an archaeological site called the City of David. This major tourist attraction is criticized not just for selectively emphasizing Jewish heritage at the expense of the many other histories buried beneath Silwan streets, but also because the tunneling for the project extends underneath Palestinian homes, making the foundations so unsafe, residents have been forced to leave. In 2009, Israel's Supreme Court rejected a petition to stop the tunneling, saying any damage was, quote, acceptable, given the significance of the archaeological discoveries to Israel's heritage.
Now, in the years that have followed that, we have seen a sort of exponential increase in cameras in and around Silwan, where you have surveillance tower in the middle of neighborhoods, and then surrounded in the outer edges, you have increasing settler homes, which are former Palestinian homes, with cameras pointed inwards towards the Palestinian homes that exist. And so Palestinians in this context are sort of subject to a double panopticon from, on the one hand, Israeli police looking outward at them, and on the other hand, Israeli settlers looking inward at them, and Palestinians have to wonder, when can I expect that the Israeli settler is going to take over my home? You can almost forecast that process by virtue of how many cameras are popping up in these locations.
Palestinians can see how cameras are used to dispossess and control them, but they also know that their phones are watching them too. We've come to meet Rula Jamal at Palestinian human rights group Al-Haq to speak about spyware, powerful Israeli-made cyber weapons that have been used to infiltrate the devices of human rights defenders.
What do you know about how surveillance has been used against you, and what kind of information it sought to gather about the activities of Al-Haq?
I like the question having the part, what do you know? Because we don't know to which extent are these technologies being used. We are still in a process of learning. So what is the work we do, and why is it very attractive to such a big power in the world like the Israeli state? We are an NGO that work on documentation of the violations that are being committed by the Israeli occupation forces. So you can probably understand that no apartheid colonial regime would like their actions to be documented on such a professional level that could lead to a certain accountability.
The Israeli government's demonization of Al-Haq reached a peak in October 2021.
או שעוסקים גם בנושאים אזרחיים ונגועים בטרור.
That's when Rula Jamal's colleague, a field researcher in Jerusalem, alerted her that something strange was going on with his phone.
He comes to my office, I'm his supervisor. He says his phone is acting weird. His friend calls him saying, I have been trying to call you back, but you are not picking up. My colleague tells him, but I never called you. And then he says, no, you did. And he actually takes a screenshot from his phone log, sends it to my colleague, and then my colleague also does the same. And these two logs are different. And that's when he literally panicked, because it is, well, it's not normal to your phone to be making calls by itself.
An investigation eventually revealed Jamal's colleague had been targeted with Pegasus, spyware made by the notorious Israeli company NSO Group. 3 days after the hacking, Israel designated Al-Haq and 5 other human rights groups terrorist organizations. Then Al-Haq's offices were raided by the Israeli military. The building's CCTV recorded some soldiers searching through documents. Others were just there to take trophy photos and group selfies. Al-Haq cannot be certain who is responsible for hacking them. What's clear is that their work documenting Israeli war crimes is being monitored and has made them a target.
We are worried about falsified evidence because Pegasus is a zero-click technology, which means that you're not required to interact with any message or a link or anything. It just actually enters into your phone without you noticing anything. So if this technology is able to actually falsify an entire interface and an entire log, what else can it do? We have been told that political prisoners, upon their release, one of their exit conversations, which is usually done by an Israeli intelligence officer, they are being explicitly asked to get themselves a smartphone. One of the people that we have spoken to actually didn't get a phone the first 10 days, and he was summoned and reminded about getting a phone as soon as possible, or they would get one for him. So there's not even any shame. It's out there, it's in the open, that yes, we are constantly monitoring you, and it is your duty to actually go get the device that we use to surveil every single part of your life.
The Israeli intelligence outfit responsible for this kind of spying is Unit 8200. Based just outside Tel Aviv, the work 8200 does is highly secretive, and its recruitment highly selective. Most of the people who work there are 18 to 21-year-olds. In a country that likes to brand itself a startup nation, Unit 8200 is seen as an incubator of technological talent. Many Israelis aspire to do their military service there with the knowledge that it could later help them land a job at a major tech firm. However, behind the unit's slick, high-tech image is the reality of surveillance work that can be far more sinister. Eli was a lieutenant in the unit. He spoke to us on the condition that we hide his identity.
They give you this impression that you're the best of the best. You're told you're defending your country, and only select people know the things that you know. And it's kind of mind-boggling how intimate you are with people that are total strangers, sometimes very important people. So it's hard to resist this sense of superiority. And you have a lot of power for an 18-year-old. You can start eavesdropping on someone just because you decided to. You can pass on his name and change his life. So it has this intoxicating feeling of power.
The former lieutenant is one of a small group of 8200 veterans who refused to continue their service because, in their words, they no longer wanted to be tools in the deepening military control over Palestinians.
The secrecy around 8200 and the intelligence community in general helps it avoid public inspection. It has this image of only collecting information, only preventing terrorism, so on, only diminishing violence, not in any way perpetuating it. But that's not true. As we know from other military regimes around the world, intelligence is an integral part of a forced control over people.
It's illegal for Unit 8200 to target Israeli citizens, but not Palestinians. That's because the unit operates in what it calls foreign arenas. Iran is considered one arena, Syria another. And then there are Palestinians, as if they were a foreign adversary, not an indigenous, occupied population. One of the most effective ways to monitor Palestinians is to turn them against each other, by blackmailing them into becoming collaborators. It's a particularly corrosive technique that creates distrust within communities, and it relies on finding people's vulnerabilities.
You always look for weaknesses. People with psychological difficulties or trust issues, stuff like that. If we have compromising material, we use that in order to force them into cooperation. So, for instance, someone who is homosexual, that is something that can be used against him. Officers are even taught different vocabulary for how to say gay in Arabic to identify these people and pass them on. Also, if someone or their family has a medical problem, we can offer them treatment or prevent them from getting treatment to blackmail cooperation. So any kind of weakness that we can use in order to get this first connection and cooperation. Obviously, once you get that, you put the person at double the risk because now he's a traitor. So you have even more control over him.
Every single action that is being taken against Palestinians come under a systematic process of dominance and colonization. And if you want to dominate over a certain people and over a certain race, you need to know as much information about who they are, what are their actions, what are their moves, how does the family situation look like. The more information you have, the more power you can have, and the more you understand how to actually be able to break the people that you occupy.
Would it surprise you to know that the Israeli intelligence services are trying to build a database of virtually every Palestinian?
It wouldn't surprise me, no.
And why are they doing that?
Like I said, you want to have control. So you have to close in on everybody. You have to have more and more information, and you end up having a database with everybody and every face. And of course, nowadays we have the technology, we have the means to collect data in unheard of quantities on everyone. The sky's the limit.
Unit 8200's operators are always watching, but at a distance from those they target, in Tel Aviv, where they're removed from the consequences of the work they do. But surveillance and intimidation of Palestinians is often more personal. Sometimes it comes in the form of a phone call from an intelligence officer speaking in Arabic, who is at times abusive and threatening, or charming and persuasive. Other times it takes the form of a text message, like the ones Palestinians in Jerusalem received in March, telling them that they'd been classified as participants in violence, and accordingly, Israeli intelligence would hold them accountable. Not all of this happens in the shadows. Some Israeli intelligence officers operate in the open, on social media.
Many Israeli intelligence officers have their own social media accounts and channels that they use to actually communicate with people directly, whether it's sending a private message to people, intimidating them, telling them to remove a certain post, or telling them that they are actually surveilling their accounts. We actually even once had a meeting in Jerusalem with different civil society organizations on Zoom.
Abu Nidal, لو سمحت إذا بقى.
And then suddenly this Zoom call was infiltrated by an officer who said, I am Officer XY, and I'm telling you that this meeting will have consequences on many of you.
أنا بس بدي أحكي إحنا صار لنا كتير وقت بنرافق فعاليات أبو نيدال.
The surveillance is closer than people think, and the details in our daily lives are being infiltrated and are being violated by these technologies and by actually people just on the other side, listening to every call, looking at every picture, and also have the entire liberty to use this information, to manipulate this information against any Palestinian.
How important is surveillance in sustaining Israel's occupation and its apartheid practices?
Crucial, essential. It couldn't continue one day without intelligence. It's like a deteriorating situation where you have to use more and more force to keep the same level of control. So, in the end, it's going to explode. I mean, it cannot keep going. There's a limit to the force you can use.
Israel has built a system of total surveillance, where military checkpoints and a permit regime combine with facial recognition cameras and algorithms to track Palestinians' movements, deciding where they're allowed to go, restricting the rights and services they have access to. Palestinians are watched by settlers too, looking to take over their homes. Their phones and social media are monitored en masse by units like 8200, which seek to exploit weaknesses in Palestinian society. And they are subjected to targeted surveillance, with spyware produced by the likes of NSO. Palestinians are, in every sense, a testing lab for Israel to refine not just new surveillance technologies, but the culture of control that drives them.
There's a reason why activists refer to Palestinians and Palestine as a lab for surveillance technologies. And that's because we see some of the logical conclusions to the most egregious forms of technological violence. When we, as Amnesty, refer to automated apartheid, we're referring to the ways in which existing pillars of apartheid are being scaled up and automated through the use of AI technologies and surveillance, as sort of an automation of existing form of violence that people are experiencing.
It definitely does halt the ambition of how vocal I personally want to be, because at the end of the day, despite the fact that I consider myself to be a strong person, it is intimidating. Intimidating and extremely annoying in the sense that how dare whoever is actually listening to the call or surveilling me or anyone in my surrounding, how dare you infiltrate my life in such a manner? It's extremely violating. It is very important that we raise awareness not only for Palestinians but everywhere in the world that is this the world that we want to live in? Is this the technologies that we want to pay our tax money to actually develop? Is this a world that we want to create, a big brother monitoring everything we say and we do?
Imagine if every move you made in your daily life was monitored and documented by an occupying force. Not just what you say online, but also what you do offline. This dystopian scenario has been an ongoing reality in the occupied Palestinian territories for decades. And the reason why people are being surveilled? Simple. They are Palestinian. Daily activities like meeting friends or going to work or school can be considered acts of resistance by the Israeli state, with Palestinians facing consequences like being patted down or harassed, be it physically or verbally. It doesn't end there. Palestinians are also hunted by the constant threat of being detained, sometimes indefinitely, and mostly without any valid or legal reason. Surveillance of Palestinians did not start on October 7. The practice dates back to over 100 years ago. During the British Mandate for Palestine, the Brits gathered intelligence to manage the local populations of the Middle Eastern territories they were occupying through a network of offices called the Arab Bureau. The British even created village files cataloging key local leaders called Mukhtars, and grading their resistance levels, a practice that was adopted by Zionist paramilitary groups like the Haganah. These intelligence operations were crucial in the lead-up to the widespread ethnic cleansing that was carried out by Zionist militias in 1948, when villages across Palestine were destroyed and 750,000 Palestinians were violently expelled from their homes and lands in what's known as the Nakba, Arabic for catastrophe. The surveillance infrastructure developed by the British and then co-opted by Zionist militias laid the foundation for Israel's modern surveillance system. Today, Israeli military checkpoints and the draconian permit system are supported by facial recognition cameras and algorithms tracking the movement of Palestinians across the occupied West Bank and occupied East Jerusalem. One of the systems Israel uses to group and categorize Palestinians is an AI database known as Wolfpack, enabled and implemented by facial recognition software called Red Wolf, and an app used by Israeli forces called Blue Wolf, plus a White Wolf app granting illegal settlers access to the compiled data. The system collects photos, ID numbers, and even license plates of Palestinians without their consent to build profiles of every Palestinian resident of the occupied West Bank and to create a vast and illegal database, dubbed Facebook for Palestinians by a former Israeli soldier. The system is, however, far more draconian than the social media platform and imposes a very dystopian reality upon Palestinians. After collecting biometric and personal data on Palestinian residents of the occupied territories to build up an extensive database, Israel then uses this database to cross-reference Palestinians with past detentions or incidents in order to place them into 3 color categories: red, yellow, or green, according to their perceived threat factor. Here's a scenario demonstrating how Palestinians are controlled and oppressed by this system. Imagine a young Palestinian man from an old village in occupied Palestine who has never been detained nor registered at an Israeli checkpoint. One day, he decides to visit a sick relative in occupied Hebron, a place he cannot access without passing through a checkpoint. As he enters the checkpoint, a yellow light flashes on the screen, and the camera snaps his photo. It doesn't immediately recognize him, so it stores his image in the database, alongside those of hundreds of thousands of Palestinians. From now on, every checkpoint he crosses through in the occupied Palestinian territories will know who he is, scanning his biometrics against a growing network of data obtained through Israel's extensive surveillance apparatus. Later, he must cross another checkpoint. As he passes through the turnstile, a soldier he has never seen before says, "Hey Ahmad, how are you today?" At that moment, he realizes he has been registered in Red Wolf and will from now on be tracked, categorized, and marked with a color that will determine his fate every time he enters a checkpoint. Will he be allowed to pass? Will he be interrogated? Or worse yet, will he be detained? The architecture of the occupied West Bank has been transformed into one that operates as if it was an illicit, voyeuristic, photographic studio. And every occupied Palestinian city is just one software update away from being monitored around the clock via Israel's facial recognition systems. In places like occupied Hebron, Palestinians live under particularly extreme surveillance, with over 40 checkpoints and hundreds of cameras positioned across the city, many which include 4K resolution facial recognition technology that can track individuals from up to 200 meters away. Occupied Hebron is referred to by the Israeli army as a smart city, a euphemism deriving from its extensive surveillance architecture. CCTV and facial recognition cameras line the streets, giving the Israeli military and intelligence agencies 24/7 access to Palestinian life. Surveillance through the occupied Palestinian territories has become a distressing, everyday embodiment of the oppression, dispossession, dehumanization, and humiliation Palestinians are subject to. And it doesn't stop at state surveillance. Illegal settlers are using Israeli tech to intimidate Palestinians. In addition to the systems implemented by the Israeli military, there are those employed by illegal settlers. In occupied Hebron, for example, settlers have their own independent security cameras, often funded by the US-based One Israel Fund. These systems, which include drones with infrared technology, monitor Palestinian villages and disrupt daily life, scaring away livestock and undermining the livelihoods of Palestinian farmers. Settlers also use drones to monitor Palestinian homes, while Israeli intelligence units like 8200 spy on Palestinians to exploit societal vulnerabilities. Surveillance is also personalized, with intelligence officers sometimes making threatening phone calls in Arabic.
أنا بس بدي أحكي إحنا صار لنا كثير وقت بنرافق فعاليات أبو نضال.
For Palestinians in the occupied territories, every aspect of life is lived under the shadow of surveillance. Mundane decisions like whether to leave the house are contingent on a calculus around whether surveillance will be present, with a constant feeling of uncertainty pervading every action. If someone leaves the house, will they come back that day or ever?
That's our program. As always, thank you for watching. I'm Mark Hage, and this has been the Vermont Report on Palestine, Israel.